The scale of this thin layer is greatly exaggerated in this picture, but the layer of water is made up of individual water molecules, all of which are attracting each other. The net sum of the circumferential attraction is that the water is actually being pulled inward. If there was no enclosed gas, the water would contract down to a ball. However, if there is enclosed gas, the result is an increase in the pressure of that gas. The surface tension pulls the water inward until equilibrium is reached with the pressure pushing outward. The law of Laplace relates the surface tension to the enclosed pressure. It states that the pressure inside the spherical bubble is equal to 2 times the tension divided by the radius. Let's take a look in the lungs to see how this is significant. If we zoom way in, we will see that the two lungs are actually composed of roughly 1 billion sacs of air called alveoli, which are connected via an intricate branching network of air passages. Most of the details of this are not relevant for this discussion, other than to say that the alveoli are the site of the lungs where gas exchange occurs, and it's critically important that they stay open and don't collapse, or else oxygen will not be able to make its way into the bloodstream. So how is the law of Laplace applicable here? First, the lungs are a very moist place, and the insides of the alveoli are coated with water. Some alveoli may start off larger than others. Since the surface tension of water is independent of the size of the alveoli, based on the law of Laplace, a large radius results in a relatively low pressure, while a small radius results in a relatively high pressure. So when a patient takes a breath of air in, the air travels preferentially to the large alveolus with low pressure. Not only that, air could even travel backwards from the small alveolus with high pressure. The consequence of this is that large alveoli risk becoming overdistended, and small alveoli risk collapsing altogether, a condition known as atelectasis. Alveoli that have totally collapsed can no longer take part in gas exchange, leading to diminished ability of the body to take in oxygen. This is obviously not good, so the body must have a way to prevent this from happening. It does, and it involves something called surfactant. A surfactant is a compound which reduces surface tension when added to a liquid. Most surfactants are amphiphilic, sometimes called amphipathic, which means they contain both a hydrophobic and a hydrophilic group. Here's the structure of a surfactant called sodium zotacylbenzene sulfonate, which is a common component of laundry detergent. Here's a hydrophilic group and a hydrophobic group. What effect does adding surfactant have to water? We saw earlier that water has a tendency to form puddles due to its intrinsic surface tension. These puddles are relatively thick, depending on the surface it lies on, and that is because its surface tension is relatively high. If we take an identical puddle of water and to it add some laundry detergent, the surfactants within decrease the surface tension, the effect of which here will be to spread the puddle out further. Let's look at another situation. We'll bring back Fido's dog bowl, and you can see that when it's filled with pure water, a carefully laid paper clip can float on top. For comparison, here's the dog bowl with a spread spot, to which I'll also add some water. Now we certainly don't want the poison spot with laundry detergent, so instead of detergent, we can give a different surfactant. An interesting one to use is diethyl sodium sulfosuccinate, better known as Docusate, or by the brand name of Colace. It's usually used as a stool softener, where its surfactant properties lead to increased incorporation of water into stool, making the stool softer and easier to pass. If we add Docusate, which happens to be red, to the water, the surface tension decreases. Now a paper clip carefully placed on top won't float, and instead it will sink to the bottom. Then we return to the lungs to talk about pulmonary surfactants, which is a complex lipoprotein formed by cells called type 2 pneumocytes, which line the alveoli. The most notable constituent of surfactant is called DPPC, or more formally, dipomethyl phosphatidylcholine. This compound greatly reduces surface tension of the fluid coating the inside of the alveoli. Interestingly, unlike water, the surface tension of the mix of water and pulmonary surfactants is roughly proportional to the surface area over which it is spread. In other words, the power of surfactants to lower surface tension is most pronounced when the alveoli are smaller than when they are distended. Here are our two alveoli again, but the smaller one no longer has a relatively high internal pressure compared to the larger one. Instead, surfactant lowers the surface tension in the large alveolus by a modest amount, while it lowers the surface tension in the small alveolus by quite a bit. The fact that the surface tension in the small alveolus is particularly low offsets the effect of the smaller radius. As a consequence, the resulting internal pressure is low within both alveoli. So when air comes into the airways, both alveoli are inflated, improving gas exchange. So what are the net consequences of pulmonary surfactants? First, a reduction in the collapse of underinflated alveoli, otherwise known as atelectasis. Second, a more even distribution of ventilation amongst the alveoli, improving oxygenation. Third, it improves lung compliance. For the most part, a discussion of lung compliance falls outside the scope of this video. However, very briefly, lung compliance is a measure of how much the volume of the lungs change in response to a change in pressure. The lower the compliance, the greater the pressure difference that must be generated in order to exchange the same volume of air. A major contributing factor to lung compliance is the alveolar surface tension, which has a cumulative tendency to pull the lung in on itself and resist inflation. Therefore, surfactants increases lung compliance, reducing the amount of work a patient or ventilator must do during inhalation. The last major clinical development aspect of surfactant has to do with preterm births. In humans, surfactant is not reliably produced until about 34 weeks gestation. Therefore, premature infants born prior to this may have significant difficulty with oxygenation and ventilation, a condition called infant respiratory distress syndrome, not to be confused with adult respiratory distress syndrome, which is quite different. Treatment of infant respiratory distress syndrome consists of a combination of positive pressure ventilation and exogenous surfactants, delivered to the alveoli via instillation into the airways while intubated. If a mother is suspected to be at high risk of preterm delivery, she can be given antenatal corticosteroids, which speeds up the infant's synthesis and release of surfactants. So that concludes this video on surface tension. It also concludes this 12-video series on fluid mechanics in medicine. I hope you found these videos interesting and useful. Please remember to like and share those if you enjoyed, and feel free to ask questions at video comments. Hello, I'm Aaron Strong with Stanford University and the Palo Alto VA Hospital. This is a 3-part video series entitled A Guide to Clinical Reasoning for How to Create an Accurate Differential Diagnosis from a Patient's Presentation. The learning objectives of this video are first, to demonstrate a standardized approach to generating a appropriate differential diagnosis from a patient's presentation. Second, to create concise problem representations using semantic qualifiers and clinical syndromes. Next, to understand the types of frameworks to which the key features of a presentation should be applied. And finally, to know the categories of diagnoses which should be included in the differential. Unfortunately, literature and textbooks that discuss and attempt to teach clinical reasoning often fail because of dense terminology and a focus on abstract concepts that trainees find difficult to apply at the bedside with concrete examples. In this video, I'll be presenting an approach to clinical reasoning focusing on a differential diagnosis that is practical at the bedside, accessible to students and other novice providers, and minimizes unfamiliar terminology. Part 1 will introduce the clinical reasoning process, and parts 2 and 3 will go through examples, start to finish, of how to apply that process to a real-world patient. Part 2 will be an example at the level of a preclinical student, and Part 3 will be an example at the level of an intern. I'm going to start by defining the term clinical reasoning. Clinical reasoning is a process by which a healthcare provider takes objective data acquired from an actual patient and interprets it using factual knowledge from a textbook or the medical literature in order to either make a diagnosis or develop a treatment plan. It isn't a single individual skill, but rather a collection of related skills. It involves interpretation of subjective data, evaluation of the accuracy and validity of data, synthesis of individual pieces of data into higher order groups, determination of the relevance of scientific literature for a specific clinical situation, critical evaluation of the arguments for and against diagnoses, application of biostatistics, and finally, integration of different types of knowledge into a complete decision-making process. Although clinical reasoning isn't, that will be the focus of this particular set of videos. I consider there to be 5 steps to generating a differential diagnosis. The first is to acquire data, and to do this, I recommend that you use all available sources. That includes first and foremost the interview and examination of the patient, but also diagnostic tests and chart review, focusing on the medication list, recent primary care notes, and recent discharge summaries. Also, depending on the circumstances, you may consider talking to close family members and friends for collateral information, provided, of course, that the patient consents. As you gain experience with clinical reasoning, you may begin to find yourself skipping the 5-step process and actually start developing differential diagnoses as you are talking to and examining the patient, that is, as you are acquiring the data. This skill dramatically helps with efficiency and helps choose the most appropriate diagnostic tests. However, it does not necessarily result in a more accurate diagnosis in the end, as it sets one up for something called anchoring bias. Anchoring bias is a tendency to place too much weight on a single piece of information acquired early in the data acquisition process, and a failure to update the differential diagnosis when conflicting information is later presented. For example, if a patient's HPI or history of breast illness focuses on his shortness of breath and happens to mention early on that it's worse when lying down, a specific symptom called orthopnea, that may lead a clinician to begin hypothesizing during the interview that the patient has heart failure. Additional investigation may then be appropriately directed towards confirming or refuting this hypothesis. If the clinician then learns the patient has a fever, has a vocal decrease in breath sounds on exam, and a consolidation on chest x-ray, he or she should reconsider their original hypothesis. If the clinician fails to reconsider the initial leading diagnosis of heart failure, even after acquiring much data suggesting a different diagnosis, in this case pneumonia, he or she has committed anchoring bias. So here's the bottom line. For efficiency's sake, it's a good idea to consider the differential diagnosis in real time during the patient's H&P, but be aware of anchoring bias, and once the entire data set is collected, force yourself to return to the beginning of the clinical reasoning process so that each piece of data and element of the presentation is given its appropriate weight. Once you've acquired the data, the next step is to identify the key features. Key features are the individual elements of the presentation, which are likely to help differentiate one diagnosis from another. For example, in a patient with episodic chest pain, whether or not the pain comes on with exercise will help to determine the likelihood it is from cardiac ischemia. Therefore, this is a key feature. In contrast, the severity of chest pain on the 1 to 10 scale is surprisingly non-predictive of the eventual diagnosis, and thus I would generally not consider its severity to be a key feature. Key features include both positive and negative findings. They may be from history, exam, labs, other tests, or chart review. The third step is to create a problem representation. This should use semantic qualifiers and should synthesize related findings into clinical syndromes. Some of these terms may be unfamiliar to you, so let me explain. What do I mean by the term problem representation? This is a one-to-two category using precise medical terminology of the most highly relevant aspects of the patient's history, exam, and diagnostic tests. Sometimes problem representation is used synonymously with the terms summary statement as well as impression, the latter term commonly used in written notes in the United States. Semantic qualifiers are qualitative abstractions of the symptom using opposing abstraction is either explicit or implied. They help to reframe the concept into more familiar to the clinician and easier to communicate to others. Common categories of qualifiers include the onset of symptom, for example, was it abrupt or progressive, and acute or chronic? Has the course of the symptom been continuous or episodic? Is the site unilateral or bilateral, proximal or distal, diffuse or localized? What is the symptom trigger, postprandial or exertional, or phleretic or positional? And is the symptom associated with pain or is it painless? The use of semantic qualifiers when reframing a patient's symptom is thought to aid in accessing chunks of information stored in the clinician's memory and is associated with a higher likelihood of arriving at the correct diagnosis. Let's look at some examples of how to use semantic qualifiers to reframe symptoms. Imagine a patient in the ER states, "For the last 30 minutes, my chest is hurt whenever I take a deep breath." We would reframe this as acute phleretic chest pain. Or another patient states, "Over the past several months, both legs have been getting weaker and weaker." This becomes chronic progressive bilateral lower extremity weakness. A word of caution here, some information is lost when the patient's presentation is translated into semantic qualifiers, which can set one up for bias if the original history is never revisited. Now what about that phrase, synthesized into clinical syndromes? A short elaboration of this is that a constellation of clearly related findings should be grouped together into a single clinical syndrome if possible. For example, if a patient has confusion, a fever to 39 degrees, heart rate of 120 beats per minute, blood pressure of 130/60, respiratory rate 24, white blood cell count 16,000, creatinine 2.4, and positive blood cultures, you can synthesize that as severe sepsis. And if another patient has jaundice ascites, confusion, asterixis, a tolerability of 25, and an INR of 2, that can be summarized as hepatic failure. Another word of caution, don't mistake the clinical syndrome for the diagnosis. For example, it's great if you recognize the patient has severe sepsis. However, severe sepsis is not a final diagnosis, and your diagnostic reasoning should not end here. You must also determine what has caused the severe sepsis. Is it community-acquired pneumonia, or urinary tract infection, or appendicitis? So now, using semantic qualifiers and clinical syndromes, how do we construct the problem representation? There are at least two approaches to this. The one I favor is to link 4 categories of information into a single sentence using a standardized order. Age and gender first, then highly relevant past medical history, followed by the primary symptom using semantic qualifiers, and ending with the highly relevant diagnostic data using clinical syndromes when possible. For example, a 60-year-old woman with a history of poorly controlled diabetes presents with chronic progressive exertional dyspnea, with exam and chest x-ray findings of volume overload, and with unremarkable routine labs and EKG. The other approach to the problem representation is to consider only this category. So for this patient, the problem representation becomes just chronic progressive exertional dyspnea. I personally don't like this approach as much because I think the upside of being more concise is outweighed by the downside of eliminating the additional information, but you certainly will come across the second approach from time to time. Alright, so let's get back to our 5 steps. That was a long one. Step 4 is to adopt a framework to better understand the patient's problem. This framework may be anatomic, physiologic, or some other type, and it's commonly adapted from a reference source. Frameworks typically take the form of a categorized, general differential diagnosis, where the strategy for categorization depends upon the specific problem. What are some types of frameworks? A framework for acute renal failure may first divide diagnoses up into pre-renal, intrarenal, and post-renal, meaning is the problem before blood gets to the kidney, inside the kidney, or after urine leaves the kidney. Some of these categories can be further subdivided. So pre-renal etiologies can either be from dehydration or from low cardiac output, and intrarenal etiologies can either be glomerular, tubular, or interstitial. Another example of a framework, this time for anemia, divides the etiologies into hypoproliferative and hyperproliferative. Hypoproliferative anemias can be from nutritional deficiencies, bone marrow failure, kidney disease, or chronic disease and or inflammation. Hyperproliferative anemia can be from acute blood loss or hemolysis. There is not just one acceptable framework for a specific patient problem. For example, let's consider the patient we just mentioned a minute ago. A 60-year-old woman with a history of poorly controlled diabetes who presents with chronic progressive exertional dyspnea with exam and chest x-ray findings of volume overload and with unremarkable routine labs and EKG. What type of framework might we choose to adopt here? In my experience, the most likely framework a clinician would choose for this problem is an anatomic one, also referred to as organ-based. So for this woman with dyspnea, that means that it could be a cardiac problem, a pulmonary problem, or a heme problem. As we just saw briefly with the kidneys, all of our organs can be further subdivided into functional components. So a problem in the heart could be in the myocardium, coronary vessels, valves, conduction system, or pericardium. A problem in the lungs can be located in the airways, alveoli, pulmonary vessels, interstitium, or pleura. And finally, hematologic issues can involve any of the individual cell lines or coagulation problems or issues of paraproteins, However, with dyspnea as a chief complaint, the major hematologic concern is, of course, anemia. My thoroughness with these frameworks is limited by the minimum font size ones used in the diagrams here, but if I was being more thorough, I would also list the renal system here with subcategories for the renal arteries, glomeruli, tubules, interstitium, and collecting system. So that's the anatomic framework, which is just one way of categorizing differential diagnosis for this problem. Another completely acceptable framework that's based more on physiology might ask, what are the pathophysiologic mechanisms that can trigger dyspnea? There's hypoxia, which can be from DQ mismatch, impaired diffusion, or shunt. There is hypercapnia, which can be from obstructive lung disease, central hypoventilation, neuromuscular disease, or decreased respiratory compliance. Less commonly is dyspnea from acidemia, either from pathologic acid production or from poor acid elimination. Finally, input from the cerebral cortex from anxiety and pain can also lead to the subjective sensation of dyspnea. This framework isn't necessarily better or worse than the anatomic one, just different. It's likely that some people will naturally gravitate towards one and some to the other. One other type of framework that I feel both obligated and reluctant to mention is the mnemonic framework. I feel obligated because many medical schools still teach and expect their students to use it. I'm reluctant because I think it is vastly inferior to other types of frameworks. But nevertheless, here it is. One such mnemonic that's taught is VINDICATE. The V stands for vascular, the I for inflammatory, N for neoplastic, D is degenerative, the second I is idiopathic, C is congenital, A is autoimmune, T for traumatic, and lastly E for endocrine. Okay, one more step to go. Apply the key features to the framework, which will generate the preliminary differential diagnosis. When applying the key features, the clinician should use their presence or absence to estimate the likelihood of the diseases or pathophysiologic states that are suggested by the framework. As a brief example, imagine a 55-year-old man with a history of alcoholism and depression presents with chronic progressive bilateral lower extremity edema with an exam notable for anasarca and a serum albumin of 1.5 grams per deciliter. One of the several frameworks one might employ for this case might be a physiologic one, where there are 4 categories with 4 major mechanisms of hypoalbuminemia. There is impaired intake of protein, seen in malnutrition, impaired utilization and synthesis of protein, seen in liver disease, excessive glomerular filtration of protein, seen in the nephrotic syndrome, and excessive GI loss of protein, a syndrome known as protein-losing enteropathy. The key features for such a patient might include a history of depression. How does depression affect the probability of any of the categories in the framework? It's not linked to liver disease independent of substance abuse, and it's not associated with either nephrotic syndrome or protein-losing enteropathy. However, it does increase the chance of malnutrition as the patient may not be eating properly in his depressed state. Yet key features also include the presence of spider angiolata and splenomegaly on exam. That would dramatically increase the likelihood of liver disease. If the patient has no history of GI symptoms, particularly diarrhea, that would dramatically decrease the probability of protein-losing enteropathy, and all pathologies that cause this general diagnosis also lead to diarrhea and a host of other symptoms. And if the key features include a UA without any proteinuria, that would be definitive enough evidence as to completely rule out the chronic syndrome.